Well, welcome everybody tonight. Thank you for attending. This is the Town of Pepperell PFAS Public Forum. It's being presented by the Pepperell Board of Public Works. We have I think, a good show planned for you tonight. And why isn't this now working? There we go. So, a couple of basic things. We'll have an introduction, some general housekeeping rules. The chairman of the Board of Public Works would like to say a few words. I'll give a brief overview of the Pepperell water system. Mass DEP is joining us tonight, and they will go over the regulatory, safe drinking water, and health aspects. I'll give a brief overview of what Pepperell's doing currently to address the situation, and we will then open up the floor to questions. Andrew, is it freezing up on your end?
There's usually about a 2-second delay when you forward a slide, but right now it still says the itinerary page.
There we go. So this is a public forum. Its sole intent is to basically get information and facts out to the public, let the public ask questions, and basically to start the process to arrive at a solution to this PFAS issue that the town's dealing with. We do have members of several boards, including Select Board, Board of Health, Board of Public Works in attendance tonight, many of whom are probably here in a quorum. But this is a meeting of significant general public interest, and therefore there will be no motions made nor any votes taken. We've also, as I said, have officials from Mass DEP to address their aspects of regulatory issues, health, and safe drinking water. A couple of general housekeeping. A lot of the stuff was on the web if you logged on. This is on a GoToMeeting platform right now. We have a 250 seat capacity, and there's the address. Not knowing how many people are going to attend, we're also simulcasting this on Pepperell's YouTube channel, which does not have a seating limit. Both of these venues have chat boxes. The YouTube feed will display the GoToMeeting chat box because that's what's being broadcast. But bear in mind that it's not interactive with the YouTube chat box. They are not the same thing. YouTube will have a separate chat box, but unfortunately YouTube has no ability to interact verbally with the GoToMeeting meeting. So in order to be fair to everybody and to facilitate some order on all of this, all questions, whether they're going to be in GoToMeeting or YouTube, are needed to be submitted in writing via those respective chat functions. I would also ask that people just pay attention and listen to the presentations before submitting some of the questions, as I think you're going to find a lot of the frequently asked questions, at least from my perspective over the last 2 weeks, are likely to be addressed in this presentation. We do ask that people submitting questions include their name and address or affiliation if they're not a resident of the town. That's something we do at virtually every board meeting. We ask you to be respectful of other meeting participants and use of the chat functions, and try to limit that to asking questions. As a reminder, all chat comments can be considered part of a permanent record, so choose your wording wisely. Duplicate questions that have either been previously asked or maybe addressed or answered via the presentation will, at least the first run around, be skipped, just so we can cover as much ground as possible. And obviously any questions that are submitted but we cannot get into the forum due to time constraints or others, they will be answered and posted on the town's PFAS webpage, which there's a link right from the main page or on the town's water page. And I will note that this public forum is being recorded for rebroadcast by Pepperell Community Media. So with that, I'd like to ask Tom Nephew, Chairman of the Board of Public Works, to say a few words.
Good evening and welcome everybody, and thank you for coming. The purpose of this information session is to ensure that Pepperell residents have an opportunity to learn the facts about PFAS that has recently been discovered in our public water system. The levels are slightly above the Mass DEP limits in one of our wells, the Nashua Road well. I want to assure you that both the DPW and the Board of Public Works have a high sense of urgency in dealing with this. The DEP first informed cities and towns that testing for PFAS would be required and that it must be completed by October 2021. Our DPW initiated testing immediately in late 2020. They've been very proactive on the issue. It's also important for our citizens to understand that this problem is new to us. We don't have all the answers yet. We've identified some short-term solutions and are beginning the process of evaluating long-term solutions. For now, the Nashua Road well has been taken offline, so there's no immediate danger. This means that our other wells will be working harder. As long as our consumption doesn't spike, we can keep the Nashua Road well offline. To be clear, the DPW cannot control consumption. Only you can. One of the biggest draws on our water system during the summer months is outside use. We've initiated an outside water ban, as I'm sure you've seen the signs. We hope that you'll respect that. The outside ban is not as draconian as it sounds. You can still hand water a small vegetable garden or a flower garden. We're discouraging the use of automated watering devices such as sprinklers and irrigation systems. I invite you to go to the DPW page on the town website to learn the particulars. The power is in your hands to help manage consumption so that we have time to evaluate and implement more permanent solutions. I hope you find this session useful and that you get all of your questions answered. I'll turn it back over to Ken. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to give you a very brief overview, not too technical, of the town's water system as a whole, because since we've announced the PFAS issue, this has been, I think, the most frequently asked question. I live at such and such an address. Where does my water come from? Therefore, it's probably maybe one of the most misunderstood, and I think this will help answer a lot of questions. The town of Pepperell gets its drinking water from five wells at 3 locations. There's 2 wells at Bemis Road, there's 2 wells at Jersey Street, and there's 1 well at Nashua Road. These 3 locations, 5 wells, operate in orchestra to fill 3 tanks. We have 1 at Mason, 1 at Townsend, and 1 at Heel Street. Depending on the day of the week, the time of the day, the time of the season, which wells are up, which ones are scheduled to run, which ones are down for maintenance. Your water could come from any one of these and possibly multiple sources in any given day. If you go back 18 months when all 3 wells were online, we basically would run 1 well every 3 days or 1 well site every 3 days in a lead lag function. The tanks, therefore, are constantly filled with a blend of water from those 3 wells. About 18 months ago, we took the Bemis Road well site offline in order to construct an iron and manganese filtration, a green sands facility to filter iron and manganese. That well is scheduled to come back online in the next week to 10 days, and that'll help us greatly. But over the last 18 months, none of that water has been put into the system. 3 weeks roughly ago, when we got the confirmatory test results for Nashua Road, we voluntarily took that offline. We are keeping it's available for emergency use. And again, as Tom just mentioned, in high demand times, such as people watering lawns and so forth, we run the risk of that well kicking on. The system requires a certain amount of water to keep the tanks at a certain level in order for the hydrostatic pressure to basically pressure our system. That's basically how it works. So if you think you live, just because you live closer to one well or another, that you're drinking water solely from that well or another, that is certainly not the case. It may be from time to time when that well is running, if it's running hard, it's been running for a long time. If you live close to there, yeah, chances are you might be getting a predominantly, sourced water from that well site. But by and large, when the system is operating as designed, it's a blended system. And so that blending also has the effect of blending or diluting the PFAS levels and everything else in the system. So just because you live closer to a well that might have a higher or lower level doesn't mean you're any safer or less safe than somebody else in most cases. So I think that's important to note because again, it's probably the most frequently asked question that I've gotten in the last 2 weeks. So with that being said, at this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to Mary Jude Pigsley, the Director of Mass DEP Central Region. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mr. Neffy, for inviting us tonight. My name is Mary Jude Pigsley. I'm the Regional Director of the Mass DEP Office for the Central Region. It's 77 cities and towns from border to border, and Pepperell is in our region. We enjoy a really good working relationship with the town. We're happy to be here tonight. Mariel Stone is with me this evening. She is our Deputy Regional Director for all of the water programs in the Central Region, which includes the drinking water program. Sandra Baird from our Office of Research and Standards is a senior toxicologist and in the Boston office, and she is with us tonight also. We were before the Select Board on May 10th with a really short introduction to PFAS in drinking water, and since then, the town has distributed public education materials about PFAS compounds in the town's drinking water. So we were invited back to go over the information in more detail and then to take any questions that you might have as a water customer. In the slides, we've tried to anticipate some of the questions, hopefully in an accessible way, hopefully without too many acronyms. I know people have questions, so I'll try to get through them, to talk fast, but I'll try to slow down and, like I said, try to avoid too many of the acronyms. So if you've read the public education materials, or even if you've read the Boston Globe recently, you've got some idea about what PFAS are: poly and perfluoroalkyl substances. There are literally thousands of them. They are primarily carbon and fluorine chains. You can see the little molecule on the slide, and they're extremely stable. They don't break down. Sandy is going to go over some more of the chemistry, which is important for understanding why it is that Mass DEP has chosen to regulate PFAS. The next slide. The PFAS have been around since the 50s, man-made chemicals. You've come across them in daily life for a really long time. It's a little bit hard to avoid using trade names, but it's anything that's water resistant, grease resistant. You can see some of the uses. One that's known to a lot of people is in certain kinds of firefighting foam, but also in takeout food containers, anything that's waterproof like clothing or furniture. So it's not surprising that just about everyone has been exposed to PFAS in multiple consumer products and, in fact, all over the world. Next slide. So why did we decide we were going to regulate these chemicals at this time? And as I mentioned, Sandy's going to go into the more technical information, more details about the health effects. But these are the exposures of concern that led to the regulations. There's sensitive subgroups, which include pregnant women, nursing mothers and infants, and also immune-compromised people who drink the water or who use it for cooking foods that absorb water like rice or pasta. So these were the exposures that underlie the development of the standard. So uses that pose relatively less concern is water consumption by somebody who's not in a sensitive group or not in a residential setting, like in a restaurant or your office. Washing vegetables, bathing in the water. These are uses of less concern. And regardless if you're in a sensitive group or not, you may want to reduce your potential exposure. And to that end, you can use bottled water. We have information on our website about bottled water that has been tested for PFAS. You can use certain home treatment systems. There's also information on our website, and I feel like I'm going to repeat that phrase a lot tonight because there's a lot of information on our website. But there are some important things to know about water treatment systems. None of them are certified by any kind of national certification organization to treat to the level that DEP has set. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency also has a standard that is 70 parts per trillion for 2 compounds, and there are filters that are certified to meet that standard, but not to meet our standard. But they will remove some PFAS from the water. So we weren't really looking at PFAS until a couple of years ago. The United States Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, has the Safe Drinking Water Act, federal regulations for drinking water. Mass DEP is a delegated state, so we implement not only the EPA national rules,
That's right.
How's Kai doing?
It's working.
but our own rules. And every 5 years, EPA comes up with a short list of maybe 20 chemicals. It tells all the water suppliers in the country, these are unregulated things, maybe we should regulate them. You should sample for them. That rule only applies to systems that have over 10,000 customers, which is not Pepperell. So under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule, Pepperell did not have to sample. Other towns in Massachusetts did. So we collected some information about PFAS in Massachusetts through that unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. And Sandy and her colleagues in the Office of Research and Standards looked at that information, other information coming in literally from all over the world, probably almost daily. The data is developing about PFAS. And Mass DEP developed a standard of 20 parts per trillion. And we regulate that in 2 different ways. It's the same standard. There's 2 different ways that we regulate it. One is through drinking water, and the drinking water standard is called a maximum contaminant level, or MCL. We also regulate it for groundwater in general through our waste site cleanup program for hazardous waste cleanup sites. And if a site is in an area where the groundwater is or could be used for drinking water, the standard is also 20 parts per trillion. So I want to talk about that first box. Next slide, Ken, which is the maximum contaminant level, the MCL. This became effective in October of last year. There was no rule for PFAS until October 2nd. It is 20 parts per trillion for 6 PFAS compounds combined. So of all those thousands of PFAS, there are 6 of them that we require public water supplies to test for, and then you add the number for 6 of the compounds, and Sandy will go through them, for a total of 20. And if the drinking water exceeds 20, that's a violation of the maximum contaminant level. So we're phasing the rule in. The rule for the first year requires quarterly sampling based on the size of the public water system, starting with the biggest ones in January. That was over 50,000. Systems over 10,000 started in April. And systems under 10,000, which includes Pepperell, will start in October of this year. Now, next slide. It's a complicated rule. It's a really complicated rule. The compliance is based on quarterly sampling at each entry point. So Ken was going through the different entry points to the distribution system in Pepperell. The water is sampled right at the point where National Road, Jersey Street, and then Bemis, when it's back online, will be sampled right where that goes into the system. If any PFAS is detected, not just one of the 6, then we require a confirmation sample. I was talking about how PFAS are in so many things. We want to be careful that there's not any kind of cross-contamination. 20 parts per trillion is a really small number, and we want to make sure that someone's water-resistant field notebook or jacket or something that we're not aware of contaminated the sample. We take those 2 samples, we average those, and we compare that number to 20. If the average is over 10, it's not a violation, but we put the system on monthly monitoring. So instead of January, April, June, October, you take a sample every month and you average those over the quarter. If any average in any month is over 20, not even for the quarter, but just for the month, is over 20, then Mass DEP requires public water supplier to distribute public education materials. The next slide. I'm not going to go through the whole slide, and hopefully people who receive the public education materials have read them. It's a really long document. It's not Ken's fault that it's a really long document. It's a Mass DEP form. We want to make sure that people all over the state are getting the same information about PFAS when there is PFAS over 20 parts per trillion in the water. We require the public water supplier to explain what an MCL is, to explain that there was PFAS in it, in the drinking water, to explain that just because it's over 20 for a single month does not mean there's a violation. But it's important, even though we don't have a quarter's worth of data yet, that people in the sensitive subgroups are aware that at this point in time, the water does exceed 20, and people can choose to take steps or not to choose to take steps to reduce their consumption or exposure to the water. And then also the water supplier should identify the steps that they're taking. And in Pepperell's case, you'll hear that in addition to taking Nashua Road well offline immediately, even before they told us that anything was going on, that there are other steps the town is taking. The next slide. So you know from the PE, the public education materials, these were the results for the Pepperell sampling in March and April. I know this slide's kind of small. The average at the Nashua Road well, and the difference between finished and raw water, the raw water is the water that comes out of the well. The finished water is what goes into the treatment system, into the distribution system right after treatment, right before it goes into the pipes that go to your house. So that's the water we sample, is the finished water. It's important to sample the wells too, because if you do have PFAS, you want to have an idea of which well it's coming from. But the lines in the slide that are in bold are the compliance points, those points of entry into the system. So the average for Nashua Road for the March and April samples was 21.53. For purposes of the rule, we round. So 21.53 is 22. And that's over 20, and therefore Mass DEP required the public education materials to be distributed. And again, we don't have a quarter's worth of data. It's not a violation, but it's something that triggers the information to be distributed to people who should know that this is in the drinking water. Next slide. There's an important point I want to emphasize is that I said all the water systems are testing based on this schedule in the rule, and Pepperell did not have to start sampling until the October quarter. The Baker-Polito administration actually gave DEP millions of dollars in the budget when we decided we were going to regulate PFAS, so that every single public water supply in the state will get a free round of testing by DEP, and that is over 1,400 public water supplies, everything from City of Worcester down to Dunkin' Donuts that has its own well. That money was budgeted for this fiscal year, which ends on June 30th, and Pepperell, like some other communities, had the foresight to say, well, we should take the state's money while we have it. We want to know if we have a problem. And therefore, Mass DEP did the March sampling, and then we did the confirmatory sampling in April. And as I said, we've been working closely with the town to figure out next steps. We also have money that's been budgeted to have a grant program, free money program for towns or water supplies that need to install treatment, if that is the answer. And this is money that's not a loan, that does not have to be paid back. In addition to the grants, there's also money in what's called the State Revolving Fund, which is a very low interest loan program that funds different public works projects for water and wastewater. And the governor has added $20 million to the Clean Water Trust to fund construction of treatment plants necessary for PFAS. The next slide. So just what we're doing about PFAS before I turn it over to Sandy to talk in some more detail about this stuff. We've as I said, developed the drinking water standard and the cleanup standard. We're doing tons of technical assistance, education, outreach, meetings like these to educate people, to provide technical assistance to our municipal partners. We undertook a firefighting foam take-back program. These certain kinds of foam, older kinds of foam, are higher in the PFAS that have more health effects, adverse health effects. We organized a take-back program where if fire departments had that PFAS foam, we collected it and sent it away to be destroyed. It was a very successful program. We, as I said, have been doing sampling and analysis for every single public water system in the state under this free program through the end of June. And when we have a community that has PFAS contamination in its drinking water, we're working with the community to try to figure out where it's coming from. It's one thing to identify it and to take the steps to make sure that the public is drinking fit and pure water as required, but you want to know where it's coming from, and we will work with towns to identify possible sources. And if there are sources that are regulated by Mass DEP, we can have those sources take action up to and including, in some communities, they've had to construct multi-million-dollar treatment plants so that towns can be assured that they're drinking water that is safe for everyone in the community. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to turn it over to Sandy, and then the three of us, Sandy, Marielle, and I, are available to take all your questions through the chat. So thank you.
Thank you, Mary Jude. You can go to the next slide, please. So the Massachusetts MCL, which you would see referred to as for the PFAS 6, is 6 of the sort of the most common PFAS chemicals that are listed here. There's PFOA, PFAS, PFHXS, the PFHPA, the heptanoic, PFNA, PFDA. And each of these, I note at the end the number of carbons that each has. So this 6 PFAS are a subgroup of sort of the thousands of PFAS that are out there that we're calling long chain PFAS. They have similar structures, so between 6 and 10 carbons. The information that we have available to us shows that they have similar toxicological effects at sort of similar kinds of exposure levels or potencies. They all have a long persistence in the body, and these characteristics of this subgroup of PFAS led us to regulate them as a group. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
We are trying. It's hung
Okay.
up right.
I was like, so am I supposed to be doing something? Great.
Sandy,
So it's,
your next slide is why the PFAS 6. Oh, there you are. Good.
yeah, I got it. Thank you. So as Muriel mentioned, you know, there are some of the main concerns about these long chain PFAS are that infants and children are at risk because PFAS can cross the placenta. So for the developing child, it's also expressed in breast milk. So children whose only source of nutrition is through breast milk can be exposed at higher levels. It's toxic at low exposure levels, and it's persistent. So it does not break down in the environment, and it also stays in the body for a long time. And because it's water soluble, it easily moves throughout, you know, many different systems, which can end up in the drinking water. Next slide, please. So the health effects that things that we know about PFAS for these long chain PFAS are from studies that have been done in people that were exposed to high levels of PFAS, as well as studies that were done in animals to sort of have a better idea of the doses that are associated specifically with these different types of effects. So we've observed effects in the immune system, such as a decreased response to vaccines, effects in development, so such as small changes in birth weight or delayed development. Also, increase of high blood pressure in pregnant women, concerns about endocrine disruption. There's effects on the thyroid hormones. Effects have been observed in the liver, which is usually represented as increased cholesterol and also other liver enzymes that are markers of stress. And there's some evidence of increased cancer risk in the kidneys and testis, and from animal data, the liver and the pancreas. This is next slide. Well, so the first bullet here is that this, as Mary Jude alluded to, the information on the health effects of PFAS is, we're learning more all the time. More and more studies are being done that will help us better understand the effects of both these PFAS and then other PFAS that are not regulated, so that we might know in the future if there's others that are important. The PFOA and PFAS are some of the most widely used PFAS from the period of time when they were first developed, and are the most studied of the 6 that are in this subgroup. There is less data in these other chemicals, but they do show, when we have the information, it suggests there's similar responses and potencies. And again, as I mentioned before, the similarity really suggests that it's reasonable to regulate them as a group. Other states have chosen to regulate them individually, but this was a decision that we felt was important for protecting public health. If you would like to get into the weeds, the details of the analysis that we use to derive the toxicity value and that supports the MCL, you can find that on the Mass DEP website, and in this slide is the link to that. Yes, next slide, please. So when we derive an MCL, we use a toxicity value that is a concentration where no effects are expected from long-term exposure. So an MCL is a concentration that you should be able to be exposed to for your lifetime without having adverse effects. Because of the presence of PFAS in the ability to cross the placenta and be expressed in breast milk, water ingestion rates were set for the highest exposed sensitive population, which are the lactating mothers. And this exposure level also protects pregnant women and their infant, and as well as infants that would be solely drinking breast milk or formula made with the water containing PFAS up until the concentration that's at the MCL. It accounts for exposure to PFAS from other sources than drinking water. As we know, there's lots of PFAS that are in other products. We can ingest from other foods or from ingesting dust. So we account for that in deriving the MCL. And we also assume that all the water that a person drinks is from the public drinking water supply. So if you're a person who drinks water, some from your home tap and some from when you're at work, then you would have less exposure than what the MCL was derived from. Next slide, please. So just to summarize, the MCL of 20 ppT is for these 6 PFAS. As Mary Jude said, it's for each individually and the sum of the 6. And we believe it's health protective of the most sensitive population and accounts for additional sources of PFAS exposure. And one thing that is, I think, really important, particularly given the accumulation of new information, is that every 3 years, Mass DEP will perform a review of the relevant developments in the science, the assessment, and the regulation of PFAS in drinking water. Thank you. We didn't clarify who was going to talk about this slide.
Yeah, we have a chart. It comes up sometimes. Some people are asking why Mass DEP is regulating to this conservative level that Sandy just described, where we're regulating to the most sensitive population at the highest level of exposure. So we just include this information so that people can see what's going on in other jurisdictions. Some states, as Sandy said, are regulating the individual compound separately. Other states, like Vermont, are adding up. They add up 5 for a level of 20. The federal government is still under a health advisory, not a regulation, of 70 for just the PFOA and the PFAS, although EPA has recently announced that they will be taking a look at regulating PFAS and doing a complete overview of those chemicals. I think there's one last slide, which is really important. So if you want more information, we have so much information on our website. As Sandy said, you can go into the weeds of how these standards were derived. We have links that if you click on the links, it takes you to all of the research. We have information for people who are not even public water users, people who have private wells who might have questions about PFAS. And rather than just sort of Googling PFAS and seeing what's out there, just Google Mass DEP PFAS. That's all you have to put in the search bar. And that's the page that comes up. And when you click on that, it takes you, as I said, to just a huge world of information. I think you'll get your questions answered there if you don't get your questions answered tonight. But that's where we would send you to the website. And if you don't find an answer, you can certainly contact us. We're here to provide the information and to get it out in a reasonable and reliable way. So thank you for listening to that. It was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but we're happy to take questions at the end.
Ken, if you could remind folks of the Q&A plan, and then I'll start gathering the questions to bring them back to you.
Sure.
Coming.
Yes, if you would please, if you have a question that we haven't covered yet, please do put it in the chat, whether you're on the YouTube channel or on the GoToMeeting app, and be sure to include your name and at least a street or your affiliation if you're not a resident of the town. And again, we will be going through those, screening out duplicate questions and answering them shortly. The presentation part is almost over, and we'll get right to the Q&A session very, very soon. So if you could hold off on those questions, we'll probably be wrapped up in another 4 or 5 minutes here. Following up on what Mary Jude just said, the town of Pepperell, we have a PFAS page as well. Yes, it's got a direct link to the DEP site because, as she said, it's a tremendous source of information. We refer to it daily. But we have a link to it right there on the town's homepage. I've just highlighted it there, and it's also available on the town's water page. So earlier I said my most frequently asked question was, where does my water come from? Certainly number 2 is, what are you doing about it? So as Mary Jude said, we were out ahead of this one on the testing, a year ahead almost, and we're thankful for that. We're thankful for the funding we got. And we also feel that it's going to put us in a better position going forward down the road as the other towns come online. And rest assured, there will be a lot of other communities, I'm sure, testing positive for PFAS here and there. And DEP's resources are going to be spread thinner and thinner. And we're grateful for the assistance we've been getting for them so far, and we're taking advantage of that right now. We've severely restricted our production from the National Road well. In fact, we haven't run it for the past 3 weeks. It's been available as an emergency backup. With Bemis offline, we've been running the Jersey Street wells very, very hard, and it's going to need a rest. And so I can't urge people enough for compliance with the outdoor watering ban. That'll help us tremendously. But said Bemis won't be back online for at least another 7 to 10 days. And so while, as Mary Jude said, we're not in violation, and we certainly have the ability to put Nashua Road on if we need it, and we will do that rather than sacrifice or damage the system. Our preference is to leave it offline and bring Bemis on and continue with what we've got going right now. We've been educating customers and our consumers about the PFAS with an emphasis on Pepperell. You've all received the public education notice. We had the select board meeting a couple of weeks ago. We've discussed this at the public works meetings. I've taken dozens of phone calls, emails, as have the public works and the water staff. And we're more than happy to spend the time to discuss this because it is an important issue and we do take it very, very seriously. We do have the webpage with the data. We're working on getting a format where we can link the results almost real time when we get them from the lab. You can also find these test results on DEP's website, although they're buried a little bit deeper and they're mixed in with all of the other communities who are testing. We're trying to make that's an example of how the Pepperell webpage will differ from DEP's. I don't want to repeat as much data as they have, but the really important facts and the Pepperell specific facts, that'll probably be your best bet to find that. We are continuing on monthly testing of Nashua and Jersey. We've done some preemptive testing of Bemis, and I'm pleased to report that has come up as non-detect. So as of this point, we have no indication of PFAS at Bemis. We are working with DEP and our engineering consultant to try to investigate and determine a source of the PFAS. There doesn't appear to be a singular smoking gun at this point, but we will continue looking into it, and hopefully that'll be something we can use in the mitigation process down the road. We've applied for grants to assist with the designing a solution and so forth, as was mentioned previously. We've even looked into using some of the federal stimulus money. We believe there may be an ability to use some of the infrastructure money carve out for PFAS as water-related infrastructure. We will be creating a PFAS task force. This will be a citizen-based group appointed by the Board of Selectmen, and they will be focusing on researching and recommending mitigation measures as we go through this process and figuring out how the town of Pepperell is going to deal with it. We've been contacted by numerous law firms about joining class action lawsuits. Some of them appropriate, some of them not, but as appropriate, we will absolutely join in that. Most of them, it's nothing ventured, nothing gained. It's no cost unless they win. And we continue to encourage conservation. As I said, I can't state that enough. On an average non-demand day in the wintertime, the town consumes about 550,000 gallons of water a day for basic, bathing, drinking, cooking, cleaning, and so forth. We're putting out 900,000 to 1 million gallons a day right now from one well. And while I appreciate everybody staying hydrated in the hot weather, I'm pretty sure that's not all water that's being drunk. I'm very certain a lot of it's going onto lawns, and that is why we have the water ban in place still, even though the drought level was mildly reduced. We can't continue at this rate with just one well, and even with two, it's a danger in that we lose production at one well, and then we will absolutely be in a case where we have to take more draconian measures. So those were the short-term things we're doing right now, and I think there's quite a few of them that we've done just in the last several months. What about long-term? Without getting too specific, because we don't have a specific answer, I would say the solutions fall into 4 basic groups, and I guess you could call it 5 groups if you are an engineer like me. There's always the do-nothing option. I don't think that's a good option. It's usually discarded fairly quickly, but in some cases where the plume of PFAS passes, that may be an option for some communities. I don't think that's going to work here. So ours come down to really things like source removal, and by that I mean either you take the source, i.e. the well, offline, semi or permanently, or you address the PFAS source itself. If you can identify it, there's site remediation, brownfields, and so forth, so you can remove the source of the problem from the public water system. We can do blending, and by that, again, I have said we have a blended system as it is, but you can actually run dedicated lines to blend the water at certain points in order to get dilution. You can do that at the tanks. You can do it in line. You can do it at a filtration plant if you have one. But there's multiple ways to blend water sources. There's treatment. Most commonly, it's filtration. There's 2 major kinds of filtration: reverse osmosis and granulator activated carbon. RO is not typically a good solution for public water systems as a whole. Just because of the waste involved with it, and you generate basically a concentrated waste product it takes about 4 to 5 gallons of water to produce a clean gallon through RO. So it looks like a granulated activated carbon filter would probably be the most likely solution. But again, it's far too premature to arrive at that solution, because there's also another potential for new sources. Now, whether that's a new well at Bemis or at Jersey or some other place in town, or maybe it's a new connection to an adjoining community. It could be even a state to New Hampshire with the Pennachuck Water Company. The bottom line, all of these are options, and this is where the task force comes in. These will all need to be vetted, and we need to really think long and hard about the benefits of the cost, both indirect and direct, as well as how do these solutions align with the goals of the town and the master plan and so forth moving forward. So it's not only is it a complex situation, as Mary Jo said, it's intricate. There's a lot of moving parts internally here in the town of Pepperell. So that's a lot about what Pepperell is doing, but I don't want to ignore the residents, because as Tom so adroitly pointed out, you are Pepperell. You do have the power. You do control the consumption of the water in town. So what can the residents do to help? Please comply with the ban, and the lawn watering and car washing. Anything we can do to ease demand on the wells that are in service decreases the probability that we will need to put a well such as Nashua online, which has a higher PFAS limit. And again, we don't want to do that, but we don't control the consumption and we can't damage the system. So that's out there as an option to us, but it really is our last option. And we're really hoping we get assistance with that in lowering that 1 million gallons a day back down to something closer than the 550. That number 550 tends to drop off again as the weather gets cooler. It tends to peak only for these summer months, but as you know, with the drought and the lack of snowpack we had this year, it started out as a low water issue, if you will, for the ban, and now with the PFAS, it's sort of matured into something else. And the other thing you can do to help is don't rely on I'll call them the unofficial source of information. Contact DPW, contact DEP directly. We've got, I think, the answers you may be looking for. I think things like neighborhood gossip and social media are great for some things, but they can be absolutely devastating if the wrong information starts to spread. And we all know how that can happen. So with that, I would like to turn this over to the Q&A section. Just a reminder that they have to be in writing, regardless of which chat you happen to be on. I'd ask you to be patient as we are screening them, and they will be gone through to avoid duplicates. And again, any questions being a written part of the record will become part of the permanent meeting record as well. So I'll thank you in advance for your participation. And at this point, I'd ask Andrew to start doling out the questions, and we will decide who the most appropriate party to address them might be.
Thank you, Ken. This is Andrew McLean, the town administrator, and I want to thank DEP for an excellent overview of this terrific information. It's the second time I've seen most of it, and I'm still learning as I go. So it's really good to see it multiple times. First question we have tonight is from Pat Harrington on Park Street, and he wants to know, PFAS is obviously transportable through water and other means. Does it remain in the body forever, or can it be purged by normal bodily functions, urination, perspiration, etc.?
That's a DEP question for sure.
That's a Sandy question.
That's a Sandy question.
So not DEP, PFAS is stored in the body, but if you stop exposure to PFAS, it will gradually leave your body. So it's, and we have seen that the Center for Disease Control's, one of their programs does a sampling of people's blood over many years, over the last like 20 years, and they've been evaluating, and with the decrease in some of the uses of the major sources of the PFAS, like the PFAS and the PFAS, we've seen decreases in the blood concentrations in people. So that represents a decrease of exposure, and so gradually over time. you would have less and less in your blood.
Thank you. Renee D'Argento, 18 Prospect Street asks, we suggested data from the CDC and from the National Institute of Health suggests a safety level of 0.1 parts per trillion due to sensitivities in the body. Why are we not using that low of a level?
The information that is collected, we look at it sort of very carefully at sort of the strength of the evidence and how the pieces of the information come together to sort of provide sort of a strong, consistent sort of concentration that we would consider representing a sensitive effect. Some effects don't reach that level. It's also possible that that information came out after the decisions were made about and put forth into the process of setting the MCL, which is a process that takes time. Certainly that information will be reviewed on the 3-year schedule. So and from a practical perspective, the detection limits are not low enough to detect that 0.1 ppt in water. So it's not a practical level to use. So aside from the toxicology, it's something that would be extremely difficult to measure and therefore can't be enforced.
Third question from Kathy Prees at 3 Blue Herons Way. Is there a test for people to know what PFAS might be in their bodies? And is there financial help for people? That's the second question, but is there financial help for people who have private wells to do testing?
So I'll address the first one. So there are tests for measuring PFAS in your in the blood. I believe that it's not considered to be necessarily all that useful at this point in time because we don't have sort of sufficient information about effects in people at particular blood levels. So it might be difficult to know how that impacts your particular health. It is something that is discussed more on the CDC website for their Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry. We can put that in the chat. If you just Google ATSDR and PFAS, you will come to their information page, and they have more information on the clinical side, so for personal health. I'll put that in the chat.
Okay.
As to private well sampling, the sampling for private water is the same as it is for public water. The test cost about $350. There is not any kind of financial fund available for private well testing. And I would caution people, it's not the kind of thing that you can go get a water sampling kit at BJ's or something. It's as I said, a standard that's tricky because there are so many ways that it could be contaminated. And it's something that you want to be sure that if you hire a water testing company, they are familiar with PFAS and that the samples are being taken to a lab that's certified to run the appropriate EPA method for PFAS in drinking water. And that information is available on our website, a list of certified labs who can run the right method.
Question, Renee D'Argento asks, there are PFAS found in pesticides. Our commercial applications of pesticides are so common. Is DEP suspecting that this could be increasing the problem in local areas?
It's hard to say at this point what the sources are. There are certain areas where when we're looking at a community and trying to figure out where the contamination has come from in a specific well or well field, we look for manufacturing uses. we look for military installations. Obviously, Devens, Westfield, Joint Base Cape Cod were easy ones to figure out. We look at places that made upholstered furniture, waterproof boots. We have found those kind of uses near wells, landfills, fire stations, airports. Those are the kind of places we're looking at, rather than anything that's related to deposition from either commercial or personal use of pesticides at this point. I mean, Sandy has been involved in some work that DEP's Office of Research and Standards is doing on pesticides, PFAS in pesticides. If you want to mention that very briefly, Sandy, it's not something, it's more about, are they there, not are they on the ground leaching into water and contaminating a specific water supply.
It was quite a surprise for PFAS to be found in the pesticide, and some of that work, and it's at quite low levels, and so that it is under investigation by DEP as well as EPA to sort of see how far-reaching this particular problem is. But so it would depend on the amount of pesticides that were used, if they were going to be sufficient. It depends on the concentration, but it's thought that the low levels are coming from the containers themselves. And I think it's something that we just need to stay tuned for to get a better understanding of that story.
Steve Themelis asks if treatment facilities will be made available for public water supply systems on, say, a statewide level or even federally.
If treatment systems or funding for treatment systems, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding.
I think he's asking for the funding.
As I mentioned, we have $20 million available in the state revolving fund for low interest loans to provide construction costs. As Ken mentioned, there is money from the federal government for infrastructure, and arguably can include water treatment facilities. I'm not aware of anything specifically at the federal level earmarked for PFAS. I mean, it certainly is a topic of interest for the state legislature. There is a multi-agency PFAS task force that was put together by Representative Kate Hogan who has Hudson and Stowe in her district and has been kind of at the forefront of this. That committee is going to meet for the first time next week in obviously Cape Cod, as I mentioned, out in Westfield, where PFAS was being talked about 2 years ago, and actually places have treatment systems online already. Those legislators are keenly aware of the reach of this problem and are looking into funding for that. And as I said, the governor successfully got us money in the budget to do this extensive testing that we're doing. So it's at the top of everybody's list, I believe.
Are there water filters available which filter out chemicals versus solids? If so, would they be used by the town or by personal home businesses? And what might the cost be?
From perspective in regulating public water systems, it's the obligation of the public water supplier to supply fit and pure water. So the answer to the question in a town would not be to buy everybody a water treatment system if that were even available, which it's not. As I said earlier, there is no point of use either under your sink or on your tap kind of system that is guaranteed to treat to 20 parts per trillion for the 6 PFAS compounds that we regulate. The NSF, which used to be called National Science Foundation, I think, at nsf.org, is the agency that reviews claims of efficiency for different kinds of water treatment, including PFAS. They update that website literally every day. And you can check and see there are lots and lots of kinds of filters that will filter PFAS out of the water. They were designed to filter out PFOA and PFAS to the EPA standard of 70. But there are effective treatment. You're just not going to get something with the seal of approval that says it will be below 20. If you're in Pepperell and you're drinking the water and the influent water is at 22 and not 400, it's an easier gap to bridge to get below that. If you have a private well, it's exactly the same. The same technology is there. You don't know your influent value is the problem. There's information on our website. I told you I was saying this a lot. There's information on our website for private well owners that talks about what kind of technologies are available, and the fact that even though reverse osmosis will effectively treat PFAS down to non-detect, we don't recommend that you invest in a whole house RO system because of what Ken was talking about. You generate so much wastewater in treating the water in that kind of system. You know that water has PFAS in it. You don't know what level, so we don't want you putting it back in the ground. So a reverse osmosis system is something that you would have to come to DEP to get a permit for, to discharge the wastewater, and that's a really tough thing to have to do. So we do not recommend reverse osmosis systems.
And I would add, Mary Jude, that if you're connected to the sewer and you want an RO system, the new NIPD's permits for wastewater plants are starting to come around with monitor and report levels on PFAS. It's not an actual standard yet, but that tells me that somewhere down the line, wastewater plants will be requiring reporting on PFAS. And so having an RO filter discharging to the municipal sewer system is also not really a good option.
Thanks, Ken.
Joseph D'Ambrosio from 18 Brookdale Lane asks, what are the current levels at the rest of our wells? And if they are close to the 20 parts per trillion, will the community be notified?
So let me just get back to the slide. At Jersey Street, the treated water in March was at 12.3, and in April, the confirmatory sample was 6.54. When you do the math and divide, the average is 9, which is below 10. However, and I think Ken knows this already, Marielle. I don't think I'm advancing information too early, but because the sample in March was over 10, we're asking the town to go to monthly sampling on Jersey Street as well. So we'll be getting reported data monthly from Nashua Road, monthly from Jersey Street, and the wells at Bemis Road were tested and were non-detect. So those are 0. They'll be sampling every month. And as Ken said, the town is going to make it much easier for you to find it on the town's website. There is something called the EEA data portal. And you can go in and you can look at any town's water for anything that we regulate. You can look at lead or copper or bacteria. You can see all of that by just searching on a town and searching on the kind of contaminant you're looking for. For PFAS specifically, you're going to be able to see that monthly on the town's website.
There's a question from someone named Dave asking, how long will the water ban last? Are we talking all year or even into future years?
It's a good question. I guess the couple ways to answer that. One is if the drought continues to get better, which is not seeing any signs of really happening, it could go through the summer. If the consumption rate continues to be high and we are worried about the PFAS levels, we'll keep it on there. For sure, it could go into next year. I mean, we've had bans, I think, in 3 of the last 5 years. But that could change. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. We could have a wet late summer and people comply with the ban and we could lift the ban that soon. It tends to lift normally when you get around late September, October, as people stop watering the lawns and so forth. But again, it's truly dependent on the weather, the well levels. As I said, this past winter, before the PFAS was an issue, we had it because of a mild drought condition, which compounded a lack of snowpack and a dry spring. And we were proactive. And I think it was literally the week after we put the ban in place, DEP announced the mild drought conditions, which basically would have triggered it anyways. But yeah, it really is truly a function of the weather and the consumption. And we will, I guess the short answer is we'll do what we have to do to protect and safeguard the town's water system. And if that includes a water ban in its current, the way it's currently constituted, or it may possibly get more severe if the drought gets really bad and people don't stop using it. We may have to take more draconian measures, again, to protect the drinking water supply versus irrigation.
There's a couple of questions from several different people. I'm going to sort of combine them into one larger question. But is it safe for young children to take baths rather than showers? And then is it safe to cook using the water right now?
So I can take that. It's safe for children to take showers and to bathe. You could have a greater concern if your child were drinking a lot of the bath water, but the risk would be extremely low. So they just can't ingest that much bath water to make it a problem. I'm sorry, I lost the second question there.
Cooking with the water.
Cooking with the water is, as Mary Jude suggested, so foods that tend to absorb the water, like pasta or rice, they will absorb the water and the PFAS, and such that we would suggest, if you're above the MCL, not to cook with them. But other things foods that don't absorb the water, that would be should be fine, especially since we're just looking at the MCL. Now we're not above the MCL at this point in time.
I'd like to just go one step further in that we've got 3 water sources and our worst source is 22, and it's been offline for 3 weeks. And if it's a blended system, our others are non-detect, which will be coming online, and 9, I believe. So I think we'll be well below the MCL, especially if we can keep Nashua offline. I guess I'd take a slightly more optimistic viewpoint in that we're not going to be anywhere near the MCL unless something radical changes in the next few months. I don't want to undersell the danger, but I don't want to oversell something that doesn't currently exist in our system either.
Jim Scarsdale, 90 Nashua Road asks, can you compare the relative risks of the PFAS 6 compounds with other common toxins such as lead often found in water? I think that's a Sandra question.
It's not off the top of my head. The populations are a little different, and I just can't speak to that. I could look into it, but I can't speak to it right now. Sorry.
Carol Murdoch from 7 Bennett Street asks, can the town assess a fine to people who are using excessive amounts of water based on their water bill?
I don't think based solely on consumption. I mean, you'd be tempted to draw the conclusion that, again, it's not being used for personal consumption, ingestion. But literally, we try to give people the benefit of the doubt, and we do have crews in early mornings and other means of detecting extraneous use. It's tough to catch people. But there are, when we do, our structure's set such that we do a written notice, let them know that we know that they're using water for outdoor uses and shouldn't be during the ban. The next letter, it's a $125 fine. The next one is $250, and the next one is $500 each and every offense, with the ability for us to terminate service if they simply refuse to comply with the ban. I wish we had a sophisticated enough system that we could monitor people's consumption daily and, show a pattern, what we call pulling a history report of consumption. We can do it on a meter by meter basis. We just can't do it every day system wide for every meter. But yes, we can show that, geez, every day between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., you use an excessive amount of water, and that's indicative of a watering pattern. But it's very hard to prove, and I don't think it would stand up in a court of law, to be honest with you.
Frank Summers, Moonlight Way asks, why is there no moratorium on building new buildings until this problem is solved?
Can I throw that back to you, Andrew?
Yeah. So we've only just discovered this issue in the past 60 days or so. We did the testing, the confirmatory testing during the month of April. As we've talked about today, Ken at the end of the presentations listed a whole bunch of things that we're already looking into to figure out how to mitigate this problem. We are not going to rush to solutions that are not well thought out. A building moratorium is certainly something that could be considered, but 35 or 40 days into this process, we're not anywhere near making a decision like that.
I'd go one step further, Andrew, in that it's based on the numbers I gave you of our typical daily consumption, and now we're almost doubled. And I just don't see us doubling the number of houses. So it would have an impact, but not nearly the impact as people complying with the restrictions would have.
That's fair. There's 4,500 homes in the town, and yeah, we're not going to be doubling the number of homes in any case, but we can certainly reduce consumption dramatically. Tony Bento on Harbor Street asks, is there a way to find out which retail bottled water is safe to drink?
Marielle, you want to take that one about the Department of Public Health website?
Hello. I'm not muted, right? Can you hear me?
You're good. Yeah.
Okay. So yes, there is actually on the public education notice, there should be a link to bottled water, but there's also a DPH link. DPH is who regulates bottled water in Massachusetts. I can post the link in the chat, so if everyone's can find that list and they can find out who DPH is actually regulating and requiring sampling for PFAS. They require PFAS to be sampled on an annual basis in the bottled water that's allowed to be sold in Massachusetts.
Leanne Newman, 4 Kayla Lane asks, how do we know which well supplies water to our house? I know Ken covered this at the beginning, but could you give us another summary, please?
Sure. The town has 3 distinct well sites with a total of 5 wells, and we also have 3 storage tanks. Depending on any given day, the specifics of the town, where the water is being called for, which wells are running, was there a fire, so on and so forth. The water being produced could come from any one of those 3 sources, and it's sent to the tank, and the tanks are what actually, I guess, run the distribution, if you will. That's what pressures the system. Ordinarily, and I'll use ordinarily in air quotes, since 2011 till about 18 months ago, our 3 well sites rotated on a basically once every 3rd day schedule, unless it was a really hot condition. And we tried to give the wells 1 day on, 2 days rest. Again, pumping to these tanks. It may be a high demand day where you might have maybe 2 sites kick on in a day just to keep up with the demand, but it was coming from alternating sources, but where it gets blended in these large, million-gallon type tanks, reservoirs, and it gets sent back out through the system. So there's really no way to ascertain exactly where your water is coming from. As of late, with Bemis being offline for the creation of the construction of the treatment plant, and Nashua Road being taken out of service, all of your water in town for the last 3 weeks has been coming from the Jersey Street well. I have to think that we probably have turned the water over in the tanks enough so that I'm comfortable saying the bulk of your water has been coming from Jersey Street for the last 3 weeks. That will change in another 7 to 10 days when Bemis comes online. And again, assuming we don't have a catastrophic need, fires and so forth, we'll keep Nashua Road offline. So then you get a blended source between Jersey and Bemis. So really, unless you're situated directly adjacent to a production well, and that well is running pretty much nonstop for a good period of time, chances are better than not you've got blended water in the main and the street. If you're next to the well and it's been running for a couple of days, you might be able to state, yes, you're getting water from that well on that day. But it will change much, much sooner rather than later. So again, it's almost impossible to determine which exact well your water is coming from.
A related question, Ken, from Blake Norris of 26 Emerson Circle is, once the Bemis well is online, will water be safe to consume? I think you kind of covered that, but so a little spin on that one.
The water we are currently producing meets all Massachusetts safe drinking water standards, and unless DEP wants to correct me, that is default safe. And with Nashua having been offline for the last 3 weeks, there are no sources even over 10 PFAS, 10 PPT for PFAS. So when Bemis comes online, and hopefully people's consumption patterns change that we don't need to bring Nashua online, that the water should remain, that it meets all state safe drinking water standards.
Jessica Harrington from 6 Brookdale Lane asks, what can the community do to make sure that our other wells don't become contaminated?
If PFAS or in general? I mean, people don't realize that each one of our wells has a protective 400-foot radius around it, which we call a zone 1. And that is an absolute inviolate piece of property that's under the custody, care, and control of the town, and nothing happens within that. Then we have the zone 2 surrounding that, and that's an area of recharge for the town's wells, that under the most severe pumping circumstances, that's the area that provides the predominant amount of recharge for the well. Then you got your zone 3s, which sort of feed in some way, shape, or form in a much less formal manner the zone 2s, which feed the zone 1s, which is what we pump out. So there are some restrictions, regulatory wise, and others. Obviously, zone 1s are no touch. The town has a watershed protection overlay district. There's some restrictions there. A lot of it is common sense. You don't dispose of things that you know don't belong in the ground. Properly dispose of things, follow directions, that sort of thing. Nothing's perfect. I mean, I'm sure DEP could tell you horror stories of tanker trucks rolling over, and things happen. But every day in, day out, just common sense, use your head. You can get into things like fertilizers and argue that till the cows come home, but there's certain things you just know you shouldn't be doing. You shouldn't be dumping gas and oil and other bad things in the ground, or compounds of PFAS, and just be smart about it. But there's I guess there's no absolute to that. I don't know if Mary Jude has anything to add.
No, what Ken said, I mean, the water supplier has the obligation to protect this zone 1 from any use that's, the only use that's allowed in zone 1 is anything related to the public water supply. And then the uses in the zone 2, and to have zoning controls that address prohibited uses in a zone 2, and to monitor through a monitoring well network to see what threats could be posed by the water system, and the town is doing all of the right things in that regard.
Steve from Wayland asks, if we hand water our vegetable gardens, will the food take on PFAS, and will the soil become polluted?
So I can address that it all depends on the concentration. So plants can take up PFAS through their root systems, but you need to have much higher sort of concentrations than you would get from watering with drinking water that is below the MCL or even at the MCL or above. That is not a concern for a pathway. Some produce that is grown in, it is found in things like lettuce and other kinds of produce that we buy at our grocery store at low levels, might be there depending on the growing conditions, but it's extremely unlikely that you would be able to reach a PFAS concentration in homegrown vegetables just from watering with drinking water that's at the MCL or below.
Sandra, we were asked by someone if we could repeat what MCL stands for the audience.
Maximum contaminant limit.
And that is set by the state of Massachusetts in the case of this conversation.
Yes.
Carolyn,
I'm sorry, a maximum contaminant level, or MCL, is what we call any drinking water standards. It's not just PFAS. That's our acronym for drinking water standard, maximum contaminant level.
okay. Carolyn Adab, 19 Deerfield Drive, suggests that the Pepperell's former Indian Head ski area has an alleged toxic site that is, I guess it's not alleged, it's being monitored. It has monitoring wells on it. Is DEP aware of that, and what PFAS levels might be coming from those monitoring wells?
So as I mentioned, landfills are among the kind of uses we look for. We're very early in the game in looking at potential sources for the contamination in Pepperell. Certainly Indian Head Landfill is one of the things. Landfills aren't required to sample for PFAS. I'm sure they will be soon, but we haven't addressed our regulations for landfills yet. So if we believe there's a reason to sample for PFAS, we will. It's not required for all landfills to look for it yet.
Tony Beatty, a select person in town, is asking, is there a safe PFAS level for pregnant and nursing mothers and babies?
Yes, the MCL, the maximum contaminant limit for PFAS in Massachusetts, is set to be protective for pregnant women, nursing mothers, and infants.
So if Pepperell is below the MCL, it would be considered safe?
Or if it's below the MCL, the drinking water is safe for sensitive populations, which include pregnant women, nursing mothers, and infants, as well as people with diagnosed with compromised immune systems.
Margie LaFleur, 27 Maple Street, asks a variation on the reverse osmosis question, wondering if it's a small separate system just to be used for drinking and cooking. Would that be appropriate for residential use?
I guess it depends on whether 27 Maple Street is on a private well or a part of the municipal system. On a private well, you regardless of the amount, I mean, if you're going to be discharging water to the ground and you know that it has PFAS in it, you would have to get a permit, and you don't know if you have PFAS until you sample, and there's just a whole lot involved for a private well owner. For the water customer, as Ken said, it generates a lot of wastewater, and you're putting that into the sewer system. It's not something that would require a DEP permit, but it certainly is wasteful of water, which is a scarce resource in any time, but certainly in the summertime. is especially scarce.
Taylor asks if we will be alerted if the Nashua Road comes online.
Maybe, I think I know the answer, but I don't, Mary Jude, my understanding is right now, it is okay to run it without notification if we needed to, but if we get a second quarterly reading and are in violation, use of the well after that point would require sort of a notification process. Is that?
So right now there is no violation, and we understand that the town is going to try to keep the Nashua Road well off as long as it can, and we're all anxiously awaiting the activation of BEMAS. If there is an MCL violation at the end of April, May, June, we add it up, and that quarterly average is over 20. And part of the solution is to keep Nashua Road offline, and then you have to bring it online. So there's a whole bunch of ifs piled up in the sentence already. Then we would have to talk about whether and how you would notify people that you're bringing Nashua Road, if that's the highest one, back online, and in what capacity. In other towns that have considered a similar question, they've relied on the website. Many towns, like Pepperell, have a part of the town's website devoted just to PFAS and drinking water. And it's a place where people can go and get up to the minute information, and things like a well coming on or offline will be posted on those kind of pages. But right now, there's really not an answer to that question. That's not full of ifs.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
Harvey and Judy Cerez ask, are the PFAS regulations relevant to private wells?
They're relevant to private wells in that the standard that was set, as Sandy described, the way we set the standard is relevant to anybody drinking water with PFAS in it. The number is the same regardless of it's from a private well or a public water supply. Massachusetts DEP does not regulate private wells. In terms
Andrew,
of a regulation.
can I comment on that question?
Sure.
Okay, so if you have a private well, the town does not regulate your outside water use. However, you should be aware that you are drawing from the same aquifer as the private wells. So you're depleting that aquifer if you're using your outside water supply. And in order to be a good citizen and a good partner, we would ask that you respect the outside water ban.
So I think Tom Nephew just answered the question. There's a follow-up question from Harvey and Judy Cerez. Are the town watering restrictions related to PFAS relevant to the private wells? And I think Tom answered that in I think the first version of that question maybe was not quite as eloquently phrased on my part. I believe I've gotten, one question just came in, but I believe I've gotten to all the questions, but I want to run through the scroll again before I say that for sure. But the most recent question that came in is asking, are we considering drilling new wells? It's from Margie LaFleur.
I think the short answer is yes. That will be part of that, as I'd mentioned, under the 4 buckets of ideas that would fall under new source. But new sources are getting tougher and tougher to permit. They would absolutely go through a new source permitting process with DEP. Locating them obviously needs to be done sensitively. We actually did look at potential sites a couple of years ago when we were debating whether or not to build the green sand facility at BEMAS, and we've identified a number of sites. We still have that study, that information, and that will become part of the process going forward, part of the deliberation of what is the, what is it, the town, how is the town going to solve this PFAS problem? Is it going to be a new source? Are we going to treat? Are we going to blend? Are we just going to keep something offline? Or is it going to be some combination of all the above? Again, it's a blank canvas right now. I just put those 4 buckets out there. As I've stated, there's multiple options in each bucket, and they all have pros, they all have cons, they all have costs, and short of taking something offline, they all have big price tags. I'm not going to dance around that. I mean, we're talking a 7 or potentially 8-figure resolution to this issue.
Deb Fountain on Wheeler Street asks, is the Board of Health working closely with the Department of Public Works for those with private wells?
Again, I'm not, just Tom stated, the DPW doesn't have really anything to do with private wells. But I'm not sure else how to answer that.
Yeah, Ken, I would suggest that answer is similar to the one that we gave earlier, where we've only just discovered this problem in the past month, and we haven't gotten to all the resolutions yet. I've been working with the Board of Health, the health agent, discussing various aspects of this. And as we start drawing towards really identifying the issue, we will start then working on how to resolve it. And we'll certainly be communicating that out to all in the community, private well owners, as well as those on the town system.
And we at DEP want to make sure that boards of health have the information to share with private well owners. And as I said, we have the FAQ document. I think we've made that available to the Board of Health. Not everyone is comfortable going online to get information, and in some communities, it's helpful to have sort of printed out copies of those FAQs for private well owners and other information about private wells that's on our website, if that's an easier way to distribute things. But it's information that we provide because we know people will ask the questions. It's not something that we regulate.
Carolyn Adab, 19 Deerfield Drive, asks a multi-part question, but I'm going to ask the first part because that may be the only part we need to ask. What other towns does Pepperell provide water to?
I don't think any. We have an interconnect with Townsend for an emergency use only. And I'll have to double check if Olivia Way is on our water or Groton's water system, right on the town line and the Reedy Meadow subdivision. There might be a small cluster of homes up there that we have water service to.
Okay, so the rest of the questions then are related to that. Have we notified those towns? Are we going to limit how much water they use and so on? And I guess if we haven't firmly identified that we're actually giving water, selling water to other communities, we haven't done those other things either.
Well, we're not selling water in bulk,
Right.
so if I guess maybe this answers the question, if those Olivia Way residents are on Pepperell water, they're Pepperell customers and they would have gotten the same notices as any Pepperell resident would have.
Okay. Jay Wolf from Brookline Street asks, have there been property value drops in towns where PFAS have been discovered? I'm not sure anyone on the call is qualified to answer that. Perhaps the DEP people know this anecdotally.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a realtor. I can tell you we've done this kind of presentation in several towns, and the question sometimes comes up about whether PFAS in a private well would need to be disclosed by a realtor. And it's not something that we've been able to answer what kind of standards realtors observe. There is a town in the central region that is now requiring PFAS sampling of private wells, either when the certificate of occupancy is issued or at the time of transfer. So that Board of Health has chosen to, the town has adopted a requirement for PFAS sampling as part of a property transaction, but I don't have any information about property values.
Andrew,
Luckily, we
this
have
is
a
Tom.
realtor.
This is Tom. Andrew, I
ahead,
am
Tom.
I am a realtor. And I do know that, I don't have statistics on this, but I do know that Acton has struggled for the past couple of years with PFAS. And I have seen no drop in property values in the Acton area.
So there's a combination of questions from Carolyn Adab and Renee D'Argento going back to the Indian Head Ski area, asking, since the site is being monitored, doesn't this qualify to be monitored for PFAS? I thought Mary Jude already answered that, but if you could take another stab at it, Mary Jude, so that the audience understands what's going on there.
Sure. We, as I said, we are already working with the town to identify potential areas to investigate. That's one of them. As I said, we look at landfills, fire stations, areas where there have been large fires, industrial facilities that made things that include or used PFAS. So we have a long list of places that includes the landfill. What I was saying is that there is no regulation right now that requires landfills to sample, but as part of any investigation that we do, even though there's not a regulation, we can ask the owner of the landfill to sample for PFAS. So we're working on that already.
And Andrew, I do have confirmation that the Olivia Way, they are Pepperell Water customers and they were notified.
Okay. But we haven't reached out to the surrounding communities specifically to notify them of this because we don't provide water to the communities in general.
Correct. But it's probably the worst kept secret in town.
John Holbrook, thank you for writing in. John is monitoring the YouTube channel and we are not receiving questions from that chat. They're available too, but they haven't come in. Renee D'Argento also would like to know if the airport is on the list of sites to be monitored.
I'm not in the office, so I don't have my little notes, but there is some sort of airfield or airport. What's the name of it? Can somebody put that in the chat? There's some sort of airfield on our list.
Yeah, it's within a half a mile or so of the Nashua Well. It's on Nashua Road.
It has like 2 or 3 words in the name. I can't remember what it is, but there is an
airfield. It's a little private airport where they do skydiving predominantly.
Yeah, there's an airport on our list. Yes.
Okay, it's the only one in town, so that's probably the one.
Probably the one.
We also have a landfill in town. I assume that will be monitored. I haven't discussed this with Ken or with DEP, but it would make sense that we be monitoring or DEP be monitoring all those potential sources.
Yeah, as we start collecting the information, and as I told Andrew and Ken and others, part of is we don't do source discovery. I mean, the whole cleanup system for waste sites is a privatized system that we monitor, but we do not actually direct cleanups. For these situations, as part of the municipal assistance that we're trying to provide in this region, we have been devoting pretty significant resources to trying to help towns figure out where it's coming from. So what we do in the first instance is try to find the people in town who know what was there 40 years ago. You know, what did that old mill make? What industries operated, where were the places where people knew that there was a direct discharge of wastewater from a facility into a river, kind of thing. So in the first instance, it's helpful to hear from people in town about facilities like these, in addition to our kind of usual list of suspects of firefighting, manufacturing facilities that are obvious, like I said, like upholstery, and there's a facility in another town that makes waterproof boots, so that was an easy one. And things like landfills and airports.
So another question about another site in town, and I think, Mary Jude, you just answered that, so I won't repeat it. But there is a question here about, is the Nashua Road well offline because of this issue, or has been offline prior? That'll be for Ken.
No, it's because of this issue. It's our highest source, if you will, of PFAS, and it seemed like a no-brainer to take it offline until the consumption numbers started peaking, and it's got us concerned for sure.
Jean Bergeron from 18 River Road asks a question that I don't quite understand, but I'm going to throw it out there and see if someone else can decipher this. Where does the water from the downtown water station go? Does it supply Westford or Chelmsford? I'm not aware of a downtown water station.
Oh, as I said, we don't send any water out of town in bulk. Maybe that answers it.
Fair enough.
Unless they're describing the power plant, which is not a drinking source. It's
a hydroelectric.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, if you're Ms. Bergeron, if you're just speaking about the plant off of the dam, that is generating electricity from the river. It's not a water plant. It's privately owned, and where they sell their electricity is a private concern of that company. So I don't have a new question here, although they do keep popping in. Ms. Bergeron thanks us. I guess we figured that one out. We have a little more time. We were, it indicated we'd be looking to go about 2 hours. I want to let the audience know we are documenting all these questions and answers, and it will become part of a not just a frequently asked questions list, but all the questions asked tonight list, and that'll be available for folks to see on our website that want to go back and check the answers out, that sort of thing.
It looks like there are no more questions, Andrew.
Yeah, we haven't had one one just came in. Will there be a public discussion about whether we can join a class action lawsuit? This is from Renee D'Argento.
I guess that is probably more in your court, Andrew, with town council.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if it's going to be a public discussion. If we are eligible to join a class action lawsuit, I think it would probably be in our best interest to do so. But it would depend on some of the details. There is a lawsuit occurring, and we have been invited to join it. I don't have enough information to say whether or not it's, if we fit into the class or any of that. It was we were referred to it by another town that is dealing with PFAS.
Actually, if you don't mind it, I'm just curious if DEP has some rough idea of how many communities have currently tested positive for PFAS.
So that's a good question, and I can answer that question. So that's why it's a good question. If you go to Mass DEP's website, there is something called a story map, and it's updated weekly, if not more often. And it visually, but also in words, but it visually has a map of Massachusetts, and it has dots on it that indicate where PFAS has been detected in a water supply, and you can hover over the dot and it will tell you what town it is. There are, as of today, 52 communities in which PFAS have been detected over 20 parts per trillion. They can tell you 26 of those are in the central region, which is why we do have a lot of answers to the questions, and we have been working on finding sources because we've been dealing with a lot of PFAS in this area. But as I said, there's this quarterly sampling requirement. So the April systems, the systems over 10,000 but less than 50,000, the April systems just came online, and I didn't talk about how long the sampling takes, but it takes 3 weeks to get your samples from the lab, and then you take the confirmation sample, and it takes another 3 weeks. So we're getting a lot of information from the April sampling group right now, and that's adding to our total. Statewide, I think maybe Marielle is more up to speed on the story map. I want to say there's something like 450 systems that have sampled so far out of 1,400, but the smaller ones don't have to sample, like Pepperell, don't have to sample until October. So there'll be another big batch coming through. And then what we call transient systems, like a Dunkin' Donuts, where it's not the same people drinking the water every day. Those only have to sample one time. They have until October of 2022, and the MCL doesn't strictly apply to them. If they had a detection, which we have had a couple of these transient systems, the Office of Research and Standards, Sandy's office, does a specific risk assessment specific to that kind of transient use and what the risk number would be. That's a long answer, I know. That there's on our website, there's a story map, and that will tell you very much updated information as all of this data continues to come in.
Yeah, as of last Friday, 591 systems have been sampled.
About 10% positive or over 20?
Yeah, that sounds right.
Pat Harrington asks if there is PFAS detectable in rainwater.
I can say there are studies that have looked at PFAS in rainwater, and it has been detected in rainwater. To my knowledge, there have not been any studies that have been conducted in Massachusetts.
Mary Ju, did you have a figure at the selectmen's meeting about the estimated population in the world that has PFAS in their system?
I've seen 98%, 99%, but Sandy's the perfect person to answer that question. I've seen a couple of different things about the percentage of people in the world who have PFAS in their blood. It's, as Sandy said in response to an earlier question, it's not known what that means.
Right.
To have PFAS in your blood, but it's a dauntingly high number, right, Sandy?
I actually don't know the number, but I know that PFAS is found in even the most remote regions, the Arctic, Antarctica, so that it has traveled around the globe. But I don't know, how we would even estimate how many people have PFAS in their blood, because if we would just have to do some kind of a statistical model because people aren't really getting their blood tested.
I think that answer speaks volumes in that it's everywhere. It's not just Pepperell.
Well, if there are no more questions, maybe it's time to end this session.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out on a weeknight to listen to a kind of technical, acronym-filled presentation about this. It's a really important issue, and as I said, we're working with the town. It's a really good collaboration. We want to continue that. We want to continue to be available, not just to the public officials, but to the citizens if there are questions or information that you need. Andrew has my cell phone number. Ken has my cell phone number. I'm not going to put it in the chat, but people can certainly reach out to us with any of these questions. And it's important, as I said, to get the right information out there. And the right information you can find if you Google Mass DEP PFAS.
And on behalf of the Board of Public Works, I'd like to thank our guests from the DEP for taking your time to help educate our community.
I concur. This has been a terrific exercise 2 weeks ago and again tonight with the first with the select board and now with the entire community involved. And I know I speak for the selectmen when I say that we're committed to working with the community to make this issue as small as possible for the entire town. Should we wrap? There's one more question that came in related to the last question we answered, which is, what are other industrialized communities or countries rather doing to address PFAS?
I can only speak to Europe. I believe that other industrialized countries are becoming more aware of just like we are in the United States and in Massachusetts, that these compounds are out in the environment. And there are, I think, through the World Health Organization and through other regulating bodies in Europe, I'm sort of more familiar with, are actually taking steps to consider reducing the use of non-essential PFAS and some other types of approaches to reduce the PFAS that would be continued to be used.
Thank you all. It's been a wonderful night.